Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I'm going to be giving my initial assessment on a potential World War III scenario. We've got Trump meeting with Netanyahu. The Democrats initially refused to meet with him at Mar-a-Lago, saying World War III could happen if Harris wins. And it's kind of ironic how back in 2015, 2016, they argued that if Trump got in office, he would immediately start World War III. Well, now Trump has the exact opposite argument based on how peaceful everything was from 2016 to 2020 and how little instability there was within the world. Trump can argue, if you put me back in office, I mean, we've already seen the potential, what's going on in terms of a peace deal with Russia and Ukraine, both Putin and Zelensky admitting that they think if Trump gets back into the office, there will be some type of peace deal reached. Now, my honest thoughts of Russia-Ukraine is I think Ukraine is going to be basically forced to do whatever Trump wants based on the money, the gravy train that NATO has. I mean, I guess the United States could say we're not sending any money, and Ukraine could still get supplied by Europe and those countries. And I'm sure they would still want to supply Ukraine because they're a lot more scared of Russia than we are because of just where we are in terms of geographically. This is an argument I never see people use. It's very important to understand. We are not Europe. We're not Europe. There's a major difference. We have a huge open ocean separating us. So when you lump us in with Europe, it doesn't make any sense based on something, when it comes to Russia possibly taking land in some of those, Western. I mean, this is the thing with Fox. I tried to turn the ad blocker on and then it gives you you can't even do it. But yeah, this article was just about Trump saying and really utilizing the talking point. There was so much peace when I was president. Look at what happened. And the dynamics of it, I'm surprised Trump hasn't used this. They said that Russia got me into the White House. Well, then why didn't they invade Ukraine when I was in there? If I'm obsessed with Putin and I'm Putin's little, bitch, then they would not face sanctions from the United States, you would think, because according to the media, Trump was in bed with Russia. So if Russia invades Ukraine while Trump's in office, then the United States would not sanction Russia because according to the media, Trump is in bed with Putin. But no, it's all false. Putin invades in 2022, right after, a year after Trump leaves office. Because remember, January of 2021 is when Biden took over, January 20th. And then the invasion happened, I want to say February of 2022. So basically a year after Trump leaves. But that's just a great argument. I'm not really going to harp on that, but I'm just saying that's the dynamics there are crazy. So Trump, absolutely, it's so important. That's why you've got all these independents coming out. And I'm seeing time and time again, Democrats, and maybe they'll revise their stance as we get into a more national type election here into the summer. But I haven't really heard anything from them. They don't want to talk with Russia. They don't want any type of peace agreement. I will say, it seems like the money is drying up for Ukraine. So maybe that's a good sign to where even Democrats want to talk peace with Russia and Ukraine. But right now it seems like they're steadfast in supporting Ukraine. And the reason that could be a problem right now, you might not think it's a big problem. It's like a stalemate. It's a standstill. We know that Russia has had those two Eastern Russian-speaking Ukrainian territories for a while now. And the issue is it's compounding wars. And this is how I really think World War III could happen. You can see this update. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea axis heightens the risk of World War III. So to me, this is the most obvious thing ever. And I'm surprised there's not an official agreement like a military pact by the East as a rival, kind of like the Warsaw Pact was, as a rival to NATO. And the two big players in that would be China and Russia. Now, you could argue, obviously, the United States by far number one in terms of power, overall military power, GDP, everything. They are number one. But China, I think everyone would agree, is number two. And then, you do have Russia. Based on economy, you might be able to say, well, Germany may be a little bit more powerful, but you could argue in terms of just overall manpower, overall weaponry, Russia could be three. So that could be an issue. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. I would be interested to see what India would do. The problem is if we get all these smaller wars, I guess I'll say what I think potentially could happen. It would be maybe a smaller axis country invades an allied country. And of course, according to us, the allies are basically NATO and maybe countries that are neutral. I think what would happen is maybe a smaller, or it could be bigger. It would be an Axis country invading an allied country, and then the other Axis powers helping that Axis country that possibly invades, whether it's a NATO country or whatever, or we could just have a lot of small situations happening like Russia, Ukraine. I mean, let's be honest, this is still an issue with Russia. I mean, this is something that has to be solved, and the dynamics there are Russia wants Ukraine, or at least half of it. They've wasted so many troops. They've kind of been embarrassed. They thought they were going to take it. They're getting screwed by NATO. The reason Ukraine has better technology is because of NATO. So they're sitting there very frustrated, and they could just say, we're not leaving until we get Ukraine. We're done with this. And obviously, Putin's not just going to leave and go back and say, we're sorry, we just wasted billions and billions or millions of dollars and weaponry and all these men trying to take over parts of Ukraine. But no, Putin's going to take the L. That's just not going to happen. So there has to be some type of give and take, and Trump realizes that whether the liberals do or not, maybe they've got other means. Maybe they want to keep the gravy train going. There's other things possibly influencing that. There's so many dynamics at play within the United States government. And originally now, it's a very complicated situation, but I did agree with liberals originally when they said we need to send Ukraine money, because the idea of weakening an adversary without shedding any American blood, it is enticing. The problem with that is because obviously we're going to be sending the most money out of any NATO country just because of our GDP, we become the figurehead for all of, which we already are, but I'm just saying that's only going to pit Russia further against us. And if we elect a Democratic president, it could be a bigger problem, especially someone like Harris, who really has no clue what she is doing. And I'm saying that, lightly, like that's just the reality. Imagine Kamala Harris meeting with all these people. You can't imagine it because the Democrats didn't even elect her. I mean, she didn't even win a primary or anything. She was chosen during the BLM riots because they wanted a minority female, and it was pressured by Biden, and it was a total DEI thing, and pretty much everyone admits that. Even the left admits it, but now they're saying it's racist. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I was saying she was chosen because of, her race and her sex, because they want to balance the ticket. I said this during the midterms. That's why she was picked. That's just the reality of it. The problem is, imagine her on a world stage versus Trump. It's night and day. That's why I think there's no way she's going to win. But we need to calm down. The World War III situation, everyone says, well, it's never going to happen. And sometimes I say that as well, just because it seems like we get a war and then it calms down. No, this is what happens. We get a war, a hot war that starts up. Everyone says it's going to be World War III. Then it calms down. Everyone forgets about it and says, no, it can never happen. That's what it seems like. And the thing with World War III, I'll say, we think it can never happen until it finally happens, right? We haven't had a world war in almost 100 years. It would be great to get to that 100-year anniversary in 2039. Will we reach it? That's an interesting bet. I wonder what the odds would be on that if we can get to 2039 without World War III. I mean, I can't even speculate on that. The problem is, if you do have the Russia-Ukraine situation still happening, obviously Russia's not just going to leave Ukraine, so that's always going to be a problem, the Ukrainian-Russian border, unless there's some type of great peace agreement. But I still think Russia's going to be an issue, possibly until Putin gets out, or I don't know, because I know Russia wants a lot of those Eastern European countries because that's just human nature. They lost all of them in 91, so obviously they're going to try and get them back. Obviously, in the United States, we can't even fathom losing any land. We just think that's the most ridiculous thing because of where we're situated, because of how big of our military is and everything like that. But of course, who knows? We've been kind of infiltrated. It's like they've invaded us without invading us. When you look at some of these people and their political beliefs, unfortunately, you do have a lot of propaganda infiltrating the United States. I believe much of it is targeted at young people, and a lot of young people now, unfortunately, hate the United States. They've taken this socialist, communist kind of idea that would cripple the United States economy. The reason we have the #1 GDP is because we have a capitalist society and we have crazy innovation, and other countries do not like that. They would love us to either have some type of civil war, which people also talk about. That's a whole nother issue. I don't think that would ever happen, but that was a talking point after Trump almost was assassinated. And obviously, like, we're at the point with Trump where there was an attempt on Trump's life. The only reason he survived was because he turned his head. What if they actually go through with it and then do it? That would make people double as angry as the first attempt, because they attempt it and then the second time they do it and it actually, succeeds. Would we be looking at a civil war in that scenario? I don't think so. It would just destroy our country. A civil war would destroy our country, but there would have to be a major reform or a major change in the United States if they successfully did something like that to Trump, who is, many Americans' leader. And obviously, it's one thing for the media to treat him terribly and everything like that, but if they really do something like that, it would be very, very vicious. And you have to think, if you're China, this is a very evil thing to say, but, you know, with where we are right now, we're teetering a little bit, the United States is, and America is still very powerful. We're way more powerful than China is. And if you're China, would you send in some foreign assets to try and manipulate some people, possibly on the left, to do something very bad? It wouldn't surprise me at all, because when you've got Americans saying we're going to head to a civil war, you know, China, I'm sure their eyes light up. Now, obviously, it's not a good thing for the world. The United States, with how big the economy is, it's going to have a crippling effect. But in the general sense, 2-3 years down the line, if we're severely weakened, that's going to help some of these other countries like China and Russia. So the bottom line with this is, if you have something, and I haven't even talked about China, Taiwan, if you have something where it's the Russia and Ukraine, let's say Harris wins, Russia and Ukraine, the war's still going on, even though they are slowing up the gravy train. I think the last amount of money they sent was around $1 billion, which is a lot less than what they've been sending. Originally, it was like 20, then it got down to like 10, then it was 7, now it's $1 billion. So even liberals, I think, are sending less money, or maybe they just don't have to send as much money because there's no crazy offensives. There's no crazy offensives by Russia, although I did hear they were planning one. If you have that war still going on with Harris in office and they don't want to play ball with Putin, they don't want a peace deal, they've got the bullshit, fake liberal talking point, we're going to drive them out, Ukraine's going to win. Of course, that's not possible. We know that. But if they still stick with that talking point, and then the projection in 2026 or 2027 is the Chinese invasion of Taiwan, crossing the Taiwan Strait, they want Taiwan. Taiwan has a lot of valuable things. It's hard to invade Taiwan. But if they somehow got it, right now they're gray zoning, they want to just take over Taiwan and demoralize the population. It's not going to work. It's because the amount of social media that we have now. Gray zoning would have worked in the 30s, 40s, or 50s, something like that. Nowadays, people galvanize, and the Taiwanese are galvanized. They're not going to want to, give up any land or be part of the Republic of China. You have that situation going on. Maybe India and Pakistan have a little argument over shared land that they currently have. That's another war that could happen. Obviously, the Middle East tensions always are a big problem. And now you've got all these smaller wars, and the issue is you've got two huge powers involved in wars at the same time, simultaneously. It becomes a big issue. The United States, back in World War II, we were going to stay neutral, and I think it's impossible for us to stay neutral because of NATO in this war. Like, legitimately, I think it's impossible for us to stay neutral. So we're immediately going to be tethered. I mean, you've got like Finland now joining NATO. Some liberals wanted Ukraine to join. That's not going to happen. But all these smaller countries in Europe now wanting to join NATO, and it becomes a big issue. But I don't think the United States, well, listen, the only way the United States is in jeopardy is by nuclear bombs. I would say they would try. It depends, but it would be Russia or China. Probably Russia, I would say. Although it's hard to speculate the technology that the Chinese have. See, the Chinese and Americans, we're smarter to where we really don't care about sharing our technology and the amount of nuclear bombs and how far we've developed them. We don't need to test them anymore. There's no point. So a lot of that information we just don't know. But I would imagine, you could have China looking at places like San Francisco along the coast, and then Russia would be looking at like DC or New York, place like that, if they did launch something like that. And it does become an issue now. Would that totally destroy the world? It would be a big problem if something like that happened, a nuclear bomb in a big city. It'd be a huge problem. The United States would immediately counter-launch into Moscow, I would imagine. Or with China, I mean, Beijing. China just has ridiculous just mass population centers. And that's where it gets really, really ugly. But technically, that doesn't destroy the world. But that would be a massively high casualty count. And so that's why this is very important that we stop the wars as quick as possible. It's not about appeasing Russia like the libs try and argue. You just want to appease Russia. Well, no, like this is the situation. This is the dynamic. Unless you literally want to send NATO troops into Ukraine to drive out Russia, which immediately pits the NATO troops, because right now we're doing the whole thing where we're just sending them money. It's a proxy war. The only way to get Russia out of Ukraine, I would imagine, it's not going to be the NATO technology for Ukraine. They just don't have the manpower for it. It would be NATO troops pushing Russia out of Ukraine, which would open up a whole nother can of worms. So what's really the resolution here? It's an interesting thing to think about, and that's why Trump wants the peace one way or another. Liberals are going to spin it like he's appeasing Russia for sure, but we know to think deeper than that, and we already know the situation. They cannot force Russia has too much manpower over Ukraine. The only way Ukraine can actually push, I would imagine, Russia back is if Russia gets so demoralized they leave, or if NATO troops come into Ukraine and help them push Russia back, which again opens up a whole nother thing. So that is the current dynamics. I think if Trump comes in, listen, Trump said some interesting things about Taiwan, saying we need something in exchange for us protecting you when it comes to Taiwan versus China. So that may be some bad news for Taiwan. And I think in terms of the dynamics in Europe versus the dynamics in the Pacific, I think it would be more acceptable, and I'm just saying this is my speculation, I'm not trying to say Taiwan should get taken over. I think it would be deemed more acceptable for China to take over Taiwan than it would be for Russia to take over Ukraine. That would be just because Ukraine is such a bigger landmass, it's landlocked with all those European powers, as opposed to Taiwan, which is kind of isolated. Now they do have South Korea and Japan over there, along with the Philippines. The United States has several bases down there, but to me, it would be more of an acceptable thing for that to happen. I think that's what the Chinese kind of want to do, but it is a very hard. Logistically, I would not want to be part of a Chinese takeover of Taiwan. It's very hard to take over Taiwan. That's why they're trying to do it without any troops right now. But the big news was that Russia and China were flying their bombers right up near Alaska, I think. Well, I just searched Russia-China to try and find the articles of Russia and China coming together to fly bombers right around Alaska, and NORAD picking up on it. But look at this. Bloomberg: Russia, Iran, China seek to shape U.S. election, officials say. I wonder what this is. What is the lenient? Report suggests Russia favors Trump. Iran opposes him. Russia favoring Trump is interesting. I understand why that would be the case. I know Putin came out and said he'd rather face Democrats because they're weaker, but Trump does have a good relationship with Russia. U.S. may lose future conflict with Russia, China without changes. What do you mean future conflict? Where would that conflict be fought exactly? I'd have to read that article, but U.S. must expand nuclear arsenal to face Russia and China threats. I don't think we really know how big our arsenal is. Why would they tell us that? Why did China and Russia stage okay, this is what I was talking about. Why did China and Russia stage a joint bomber exercise near Alaska? This is the first time China and Russia have conducted a joint patrol near Alaska and in the northern Pacific. It is also the first time that Chinese and Russian aircraft have taken off from the same Russian base. The bombers came within 200 miles of the coast of Alaska. I was joking. What if China and Russia tried invading Alaska? If that actually happened, I think if you look at the map, the farthest eastern tip of Russia, it's so close to Alaska. You could they were talking about like building something as a connector. Now that never ended up happening, but that's how close it is. But we would know. It'd be so obvious. They would be moving all their shit up there, you would imagine, to try and invade, because that would be the easiest way to do it. You would not be traveling far by sea into Alaska, but that would be an interesting scenario. Obviously, that would be terrible, but technically, Russia did have Alaska. It was part of the Russian Empire. Then they sold it for, what was it, $7 million? Obviously, in today's money, it's a lot more, but that's why I want the United States to buy Greenland. Those deals always end up working out. That they value Greenland. It's people are like, well, it's going to be $1 trillion. No way, it's not going to be $1 trillion. You ask ChatGPT, it's like, listen, it's you could get it for like 50 billion possibly. The amount of resources Greenland has is very interesting. Denmark's doing nothing with it. And that's why Trump wanted to buy Greenland. It makes sense. Whenever you purchase land, it's almost always a good deal because you have the resource to actually extract whatever is in the land, like in Greenland, out of the glaciers under them, as opposed to Denmark not doing anything with them. And also you have the warming up there. So the problem with that is people say, well, Greenland and northern Canada are going to be a lot more livable. That's really not how global warming works. Even in the most liberal cases where it warms significantly, that glacier is not going anywhere. Now, sure, it'll melt a little bit, but it's so... The glacier on Greenland I'm talking about, it's so deep in the center, there's no way. It would be like 2200 before that thing came close to melting. But yeah, this is very interesting stuff. Why are Russia and China conducting a joint patrol, and why now? And you can see the timing of these flights could also be seen as a counter to high-profile international events between the U.S. and its allies in the region, Beijing and Moscow. Yeah, this is not a very good sign. I mean, it could be nothing. I'm sure a lot of people didn't even know this happened. You know, maybe it is nothing. I don't know. But when you've got something like that and they're saying this is the first time they've done it and they both took off from the same Russian military base, it's an ominous thing. So, you know what? It's important to tell, you know, a lot of the white women, you know, Trump gets in. This is a serious World War III scenario. You guys were the ones arguing that Trump was going to start World War III in 2016 and nothing happened. And look at where we are now. We don't know what type of dialogue and what type of moves that the Democrats are going to make when it comes to China. I mean, they're just doing the bullshit like, oh, you know, we just support NATO. And that's the other problem is Biden, because of how weak he was, he let NATO, you know, the United States be hijacked by this European NATO narrative. And it's like, we all have to defend Ukraine. Well, no, we're at a completely different part. Yes, we want to keep Europe safe. That's fine. But this is not a dire situation for us. We're located in a different part. We have a massive ocean separating us from Europe. I'm not saying that we need to get out and just appease Russia and let them invade everywhere. Number one, they really can't. I mean, that's the thing with Russia. Even though they've got, you know, a ton of natural resources, a relatively big military budget, Germany is right there with them in terms of just overall GDP, and some of those other European countries are relatively high as well. So them trying to invade all of Europe seems like a 0% chance that'll ever happen. I think they probably just want those eastern countries, which that in and of itself is probably not going to happen and would be very, very ugly, considering look at what they've done. They can't even get half of Ukraine. They've only gotten 2 districts at this point because of NATO defenses. I just think they don't have a leg to stand on. That's why if I was China and Russia, I would be trying to interfere with the United States and cause issues which could potentially cause a civil war or a massive split within the U.S. The U.S. is simply too big of a power right now, especially because they're in NATO. It's hurting Russia significantly. So all of this is going on. And if Trump gets back in, I mean, this can all be solved. And I don't know what's going to go on with Taiwan, but it seems like Trump he wants some things from Taiwan for us to potentially defend them against China. And whether or not China gets Taiwan, could that enable the United States to do something in response? What would we do? We really don't invade places, honestly. There's really no place. I mean, I just don't see a place that we would really need to invade or anything like that. Yeah, we could take over Canada. There's no point. Canadians like being part of Canada. When you have a population that's as big, which technically Canada in terms of person per square mile, it's very small, but still, you know, you're dealing with Toronto. Those people are just not going to want to be Americans. They just don't want to. So there's no point in doing that. I more so look to areas that the United States can buy that have very limited population, like maybe the Northern Territories in Canada, which probably will never happen, but it's more so like areas like that. I mean, we did see Russia annex Crimea, but obviously we're at a much different place than they are. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.